I have a piece of plywood here I'm going to be using as an adjustable shelf, and pretty typical for something like this. I put a piece of edging on the front that's hardwood, and I've left it proud about a little bit north of a 1/16 of an inch, and I want to trim it flush to the face here. Now you might be tempted to take a handheld router with a flush trim bit and put it on top of here and run it along. The only problem is that can get a little bit tippy. Let me show you how to use the router table to do this. Now here at the router table I've installed a 1/2 inch straight cutting bit with a bearing. I'm going to use that bearing to set this all up. I've made this very simple auxiliary fence, and all it is a piece of MDF. I've cut a hole in here so the bit can pass through. I've installed some nuts and bolts that are going to get installed into the T-track. And when this is all put together, it's going to raise this piece up about 1 inch off the top of the table. Now I want to take this fence and get it just about even with this ball bearing here. I'm just going to take a steel ruler, put it up against there, just slowly move the fence over until it just kisses that bit. I can see I still got a little bit of movement here. That's okay. I'm going to use the micro adjust feature of this to get that even. Now that I have all this set up, I can just take the face of the shelf, place it against the fence, and run it through. So that's what I'm looking for, is a nice flush surface. I'm going to show you how to make a mortise using the router table. First thing I've done is I've marked out my mortise. Now it's 2 inches long, it's a 1/4 inch wide, and on the front of the piece I've marked out where the starting and stopping points are, and on the end of the board I've marked out the thickness of it. Now I've got a 1/4 inch spiral upcut bit, and actually since the router is upside down, it's going to be pulling the chips down. I've got under the table a dust collection which will help draw the chips out of there. And I've adjusted the fence so that router bit is sitting right between those 2 lines I've drawn on the end, and that's going to show where the material is being taken away from. Now with my fence set to the correct depth, I need to mark the starting and stopping points of the bit. So I'm taking my piece of stock, pushed it up against here. I'm going to take a piece of blue tape and put it in front just like this. And then I can take a square, put it up against the trailing edge of the bit, put it up to the leading edge of the bit, and make a mark. Now I've got the starting and stopping points. Now for the first pass, I've got the bit lowered to a 1/4 inch above the table. Pretty much the rule of thumb is you don't want to go deeper than the bit is wide. So I'm going to do this in 3 passes. I'm going to start at a 1/4 inch, move it up to a 1/2 inch, and then the full 3/4 inch depth of this mortise. Now the operation for doing this is really simple. I'm just going to make sure that my piece is placed firmly up against the fence. I'm going to lower it down on the first mark and push it through till it hits the second mark, and then raise it up, raise the bit up, and repeat a couple times till I get my 3/4 inch depth. So I'm left with is a nice clean mortise, 2 inches long, 3/4 inches deep, and perfectly centered on this board. Now I can either square the ends of this or round over the shoulders of the tenon when I make the tenon to fit this. So I have these 2 boards that I want to glue together to make one board. But as you can see, I've got this really ugly gap here. I'm going to show you how to set up the router table to use as a joiner. So I've got this shim here I cut over the table saw. It's about a 32nd of an inch thick. It doesn't really matter. Something close to that is fine. And I've got some double-sided tape on here. What I want to do is peel this off, and I'm going to take it and put it on the trailing edge of my fence. And I've got a 1/2 inch straight cutting bit with a bearing on the top. And what I want to do is I want to adjust the fence so the bearing is even with this. So I'm just going to take this straight edge. I'm going to turn it over because it's going to give me a little bit of height. I'm just going to adjust the fence until I just kiss that bearing. Well, setup is pretty much done on this, and you could use the shim as it is right here. Now my particular model of router table fence has an offset adjustment. I'm going to show you how to use that instead of using the shim. Now here's the offset feature of this router table. As you can see, I've got little graduation marks there, and I'm right there at the first mark. Each one of those marks is a 32nd of an inch. So I can loosen this up and then slide this forward to the next mark, tighten it down, and now I know I'm at a 32nd of an inch. Now I want to try to make a cope and stick joint for door frames. Now for this you are going to need a rail and stile bit for your router table. The first step in this process is to cut the cope in the end of the rails. And I've installed my coping bit in my router table. With the test piece mounted in my coping sled, I've marked down 1/8 of an inch, and I'm just going to lower this bit until it hits that 1/8 of an inch mark. Now I can micro adjust my fence so it just kisses that ball bearing. With the test piece on my coping sled and a backer board, I'm ready to go ahead and make the test cut. Well, with my test cut exactly where I want it to be, I'm going to go ahead and cut the rails on the real pieces. Now with the piece I just cut face down on the router table, I'm going to use my micro adjust feature to get the top of this even with that rabbet I made before. With my fence adjusted properly to the bearing and a feather board in place, I'm ready to go ahead and run a test piece through. So after making the test cut and putting the two pieces together, I can see that the stile is a little bit proud of the rail on the back. So I need to raise the bit up a little bit to compensate for that, and then make another test cut. So I ran another test piece through after bumping the bit up a little bit, and this is what I'm left with. This is really, really nice and smooth. So I'm going to go ahead and run the rest of the pieces through the router. So here's the completed door frame. Everything is really nice and flush and square. So let's make a raised panel for that door frame we just made with the panel raising bit. I've installed the panel raising bit in my router table, and I've got it raised up just so it creates a little bit of a flat spot right above the top of this groove. And I have the fence adjusted so that the depth of the bit is just outside the bottom of that groove. With this all set up, I'm going to run the piece through. Now this is not the final pass. I need to make some adjustments after this initial pass. So I've got that first edge cut, and what I'm really shooting for is about 3/8 of an inch on that. And I'm just a little bit north of that. So I'm going to make an adjustment to the fence, run it through again, and keep running it through until I get that to 3/8 of an inch. Well, I'm at that 3/8 of an inch, so I'm going to go ahead and run the other end through and then do the long grain on each side. Now that I have the raised panel side complete, I need to go on the back, and I need to create a rabbet that's 1/8 of an inch deep and 3/8 of an inch wide. I've installed a 1/2 inch straight cutting bit on my router table, and it's raised up just shy of 1/8 of an inch, and I've got a little bit more than 3/8 of an inch exposed on this. So I'm going to go ahead and make a back cut on the panel and see where that leaves me. So after that initial cut, I did have to raise the bit up just a little bit, but this is the fit I'm looking for. It goes on easy, but it doesn't come out either. So I'm going to go ahead and run the rest of the board all the way around. Well, here's the completed raised panel and the frame we made before. Looks great and very easy to do if you know the steps.